For the English 375 Text and Context semester project, I decided to investigate the connection between Walt Whitman's Song of Myself and Ralph Waldo Emerson's The Poet, and how both authors identify what it means to be a poet. This is how Whitman and Emerson use identity and grammar choices to convey what it really means to be a poet. Before looking at Whitman's Song of Myself, my instructor, Dr. David Miller, provided my peers and I 5 secondary sources regarding either Walt Whitman's life or his writings. These sources included The Body Politic and Democratic Vistas by Harold Aspis, Song of Myself, The Paradox of the Project by Jeffrey Gordon, Whitman's First Person Plural by Alison Brickey, Democratic Portraiture, The Political Aesthetics of the Individual and the Collective in Whitman's Song of Myself by P.M. Loonan, and the Walt Whitman Wikipedia website. Blasphemous, I know. I read through each of these secondary sources and noted any structural subject patterns within each individual essay. From these patterns, emergent codes were formed. My peers and I shared our emergent codes in a master list. I picked 8 that I believed would best nurture my question about identity as a poet. My instructor, Dr. David Miller, compiled a list of predecessor and successor texts to Whitman's Song of Myself. Some of the texts included John F. Sullivan's Annexation, Elias Hicks' The Foundation Principle Jesus Laid, Stephen Foster's Old Folks at Home, Langston Hughes' I Too Sing America, and Amanda Gorman's The Hill We Climb. Because I was interested in discovering any influence prior authors had on Whitman's view of poetic identity, I selected the predecessor text, The Poet, by Ralph Waldo Emerson. The coding process included taking the same codes that were emergently formed through secondary sources and used to directly code randomly selected sections of Song of Myself, and applying them to the entire Emerson text. For clarity and easy replication, some codes were carefully redefined. For example, the code body was used in the Song of Myself dataset to note the word body, or other language that specified a part of the human body. But when applied to Emerson's The Poet, the clause references to anatomy will be assumed to be human unless explicitly stated otherwise was added to clear up any confusion the text may have caused the researcher. The code body, which in both datasets notes mentions of the physical form by recording the word body or other language that specifies the human body, is used significantly by both Whitman and Emerson. For example, in Song of Myself, Whitman remarks in stanza 33, "Wherever the human heart beats with terrible throes under its ribs." In The Poet, Emerson similarly conveys objects paint their images on the retina of the eye. Both authors use bodily language to express, either as the speaker or to the subject of their writings, that they are one and the same, human. However, the idea that both Whitman and Emerson relate to their speaker and or reader by way of species is quickly turned on its head when identity is taken into account. The code identity notes the subject-verb agreement, I am, in Song of Myself, and poets is/are in The Poet. In Song of Myself, Walt Whitman concurs with the claims of physical humanity and body, saying, I am the man, but he also disputes them when he says, I am the clock myself. Similarly, in The Poet, Ralph Waldo Emerson states, poets are men, before eventually saying, poets are thus liberating gods. While Whitman begins to refer to himself, his central subject, as capable of becoming inanimate objects, something often able to be manipulated and controlled by humanity, Emerson conversely begins to refer to the poet, his central subject, as something more than human, something beyond human control or comprehension, a god. Adverbial when, a code that notes the use of adverbs that answer the questions of when the verb occurred, furthers the idea that Whitman ties his poetic experience in Song of Myself to the human perception of the world. For example, Whitman writes, what I guessed while I lay alone in my bed, and tickets buying, taking, selling, but to the feast never once going, both directly state activities and or experiences of humans. Whitman even aligns adverbial when and body in stanza 50, line 2, when he writes, wrenched and sweaty, calm and cool, then my body becomes. Ralph Waldo Emerson also acknowledges his own physical humanity under the code body. However, identity, for Emerson, allows for human or divine perception of poets. For example, he says, the poet is emperor in his own right, which is a human-created title, but then goes on writing, the poet is the namer or language maker, which are specific and capitalized titles that are not in common use among human hierarchies. Furthermore, Emerson uses adverbial when to discuss topics that reach beyond a general understanding of human life, such as immortality and existence beyond humanity. For example, in the first section of The Poet, Emerson writes expressively, "Divine ideas below, which always keep us young and always keep us so." He also states, "For poetry was all written before time was, and whenever we are so finely organized that we can penetrate into the region where the air is music." These statements, while not explicitly announcing who us or we are, give the reader a glimpse into the idea of staying forever young and being able to see and experience the poetic region that Emerson says existed before time was, and goes on to describe as heaven that man shall never inhabit. Walt Whitman uses body, identity, and the adverbial when to tie himself, his central subject in Song of Myself, to the human body, physical objects made and sustained by humans, and to describe human experiences. Ralph Waldo Emerson uses body, identity, and the adverbial when to tie poets, his central subject in The Poet, to living in the human body, but also to understanding the namers, sayers, and language makers, or gods who created poetry, as immortal, heaven-bound creatures that every poet should seek to meet. While Walt Whitman emphasizes the peaceful and human nature of the poet in Song of Myself, Ralph Waldo Emerson emphasizes the powerful and eternal nature of the poet.